The orc woman sat hunched on the rain-slicked bench outside the coach station, her shoulders shaking with sobs that she tried to muffle behind her calloused hands, and twin girls with matching braids stopped mid-skip to stare at the green-skinned stranger whose tears mixed with the downpour. Greta Zarov had not meant to end up here, weeping in public like a child, but 3 days of walking from inn to inn with her small bundle of possessions had broken something inside her. Every door had closed when they saw her face. Every innkeeper had suddenly discovered their rooms were full or their prices had doubled, or they simply did not serve her kind. The coins her husband had left her before the fever took him were gone now, spent on food and one night in a stable where the owner had at least allowed her to sleep in the hayloft for twice the usual rate. She pressed her palms against her eyes, trying to stem the flow of tears. It was undignified. Orcs were supposed to be strong, resilient, capable of enduring hardship. But she was tired and hungry and so very alone, and the rain was cold and she had nowhere to go. "Why is she crying?" a small voice whispered. Greta looked up to see 2 little girls, perhaps 7 years old, identical down to their freckles and the way they tilted their heads in curiosity. They wore simple homespun dresses under heavy wool cloaks, and their brown eyes were wide with concern. "I do not know," she managed, her voice thick. "I am sorry, I did not mean to frighten you." "You are not frightening," the girl on the left said decisively. "You are sad." "Very sad," her sister agreed. "Did you lose something?" Greta's throat tightened. "Yes, someone. My husband died 6 weeks ago." The twins exchanged a glance that seemed to communicate something beyond words. Then the girl on the right reached out and patted Greta's knee with a small, warm hand. "Our mama died too," she said matter-of-factly. 2 years ago when the winter fever came. Papa says she is with the stars now." "I am sorry," Greta whispered, fresh tears spilling down her cheeks. "Are you hungry?" the other twin asked. "We have stew at home. Papa made a lot because he always makes too much." "I cannot," Greta said, though her stomach clenched at the mention of food. "Thank you, but I should not." "But you are crying and you are hungry," the first girl insisted with the straightforward logic of childhood. "Mama always said when someone is sad and hungry, you share what you have." "Odette, Marielle." The voice was low and rough, cutting through the rain like an axe through wood. The twins turned, and Greta looked up to see a man striding toward them from the station door. He was tall and broad-shouldered, dressed in work clothes that were soaked through from the rain. His face was all hard angles, weathered by sun and wind, and his dark hair was plastered to his forehead. He looked like a man carved from oak, solid and unyielding. "Papa!" the twins chorused, running to him. He caught them each by the shoulder, his large hands gentle despite their size. His eyes, a startling gray-blue, moved from his daughters to Greta and back again. His expression did not change, but Greta saw something flicker in his gaze as he took in her tear-stained face and the way she clutched her bundle to her chest. "We invited her to supper," Odette or Marielle said. Greta could not tell them apart yet. "She lost her husband," the other added. "Like we lost Mama." The man was silent for a long moment. The rain hammered down around them, turning the station yard into a maze of puddles. Somewhere in the distance, a coach horn sounded. "I am sorry," Greta said quickly, getting to her feet. Her legs were stiff from sitting so long in the cold. "Your daughters were very kind, but I should not impose." "You have nowhere to go," the man said. It was not a question. Greta's pride wanted her to lie, but she was too tired. "No." He looked at her for another long moment, his face unreadable. Then he sighed, a sound that seemed to come from somewhere deep in his chest. "Come on, then," he said, turning back toward the road. "Supper is getting cold." "Papa, she needs to bring her things," one twin piped up. He paused, glancing back at the small bundle in Greta's arms. "That all you have?" "Yes." He grunted and started walking again. The twins each grabbed one of Greta's hands and tugged her forward, their faces bright with pleasure despite the rain. "I am Odette," the girl on her left announced. "And I am Marielle," said her sister. "You can remember because I have a tiny scar right here." She pointed to a spot just above her right eyebrow that Greta could barely see. "Thank you," Greta said softly. "I am Greta." "That is a nice name," Odette said approvingly. "Do you like stew?" "Papa makes good stew." "Only good," the man called back without turning around. "Very good," Marielle corrected, grinning. "The best in the whole valley." They walked through the village, past shuttered shops and houses with smoke curling from their chimneys. A few people peered out at them through rain-streaked windows, and Greta saw more than one face twist with suspicion or distaste when they spotted her. She kept her head down and let the girls lead her along. The Sawyers' house sat at the edge of the village, a sturdy timber structure with a stone foundation and a wide porch. Behind it, Greta could see the dark shapes of a sawmill and lumber yard through the rain. The man led them up onto the porch and pushed open the door, ushering them all inside. The interior was warm and smelled of wood smoke and cooking. The main room held a large stone hearth, a rough-hewn table with 4 chairs, and a pair of smaller beds tucked into one corner behind a curtain. Everything was clean but spare, built for function rather than comfort. "Get out of those wet things," the man said, shrugging off his own cloak and hanging it on a peg by the door. "I will dish up." The twins stripped off their cloaks and dresses with the unself-conscious ease of children, revealing dry shifts underneath. They hung their wet clothes by the fire and then turned expectantly to Greta. "You can put yours here," Marielle said, pointing to an empty peg. Greta hesitated. Her traveling cloak was soaked through and her dress beneath was damp. But she had nothing dry to change into, and she felt suddenly awkward standing in this stranger's home. The man reappeared from what must have been a small pantry, carrying a clay pot of stew. He set it on the table and glanced at her. "There is a quilt on the chair," he said, nodding toward a rocking chair near the fire. "You can wrap up in that while your things dry." It was practical, not kind, but Greta was grateful nonetheless. She removed her cloak and hung it by the fire, then wrapped the quilt around her shoulders. It was thick and warm, patched in a dozen places but clean and well made. The man ladled stew into 4 wooden bowls and set them on the table. The twins climbed into their chairs and waited, hands folded, until he sat down at the head of the table. Only then did they pick up their spoons. Greta sat in the remaining chair, the quilt still wrapped around her. The stew smelled like heaven, rich with meat and vegetables and herbs. Her stomach growled audibly. "Eat," the man said, and it was not quite in order but close. Greta ate. The stew was indeed very good, thick and hearty and hot. She tried to pace herself to eat with dignity, but she was so hungry that she finished her bowl before anyone else. When she looked up, the man was watching her with those unreadable gray-blue eyes. "More?" he asked. "I should not," she began. He was already refilling her bowl. "You are hungry. Eat." The twins chattered through the meal, telling their father about their day at the village school and the frog they had found in the mill pond, and the way old Mrs. Harrow's cat had climbed onto the roof and would not come down. The man listened with his head tilted slightly, asking occasional questions in his rough, economical way. Greta ate her second bowl more slowly, savoring each bite, and watched them. The girls clearly adored their father, despite his gruff manner. And he, for all his hard edges, was gentle with them in a way that made her chest ache. She could see it in the way he pushed the bread basket closer to Marielle without being asked, in the way he reached over to tuck a loose strand of hair behind Odette's ear. When the meal was finished, the girls cleared the table without being told, carrying the bowls to a wash basin by the pantry. The man stayed seated, his hands folded on the table, and looked at Greta. "You can sleep by the fire tonight," he said. "Tomorrow we will figure out what comes next." "I cannot repay you," Greta said quietly. "I have no money left. Did not ask for money." "Then why are you helping me?" He was silent for a moment, his gaze drifting to where his daughters were washing dishes, their heads bent together as they whispered and giggled. When he looked back at Greta, something in his expression had softened, just slightly. "Because they asked me to," he said simply. "And because leaving you out in that rain would have been wrong." It was the most words he had strung together since they met, and Greta felt something warm unfurl in her chest. Not hope exactly, but perhaps the memory of what hope felt like. "Thank you," she said. "Truly." He nodded once and stood. "There are extra blankets in the chest. Help yourself." That night, Greta lay wrapped in blankets by the fire and listened to the rain drum against the roof. The twins were asleep in their beds, and she could hear the quiet creak of the rocking chair where the man sat, keeping watch. She did not know if he was watching her or simply could not sleep, but the sound was oddly comforting. For the first time in 6 weeks, she felt safe. When Greta woke, pale morning light was filtering through the windows and the smell of porridge hung in the air. She sat up, disoriented for a moment, and then remembered where she was. Her clothes, hung by the fire the night before, were dry now. She dressed quickly, folding the blankets and setting them neatly on the chair. The man was at the stove, stirring a pot. The twins were still asleep, their breathing soft and even. "Morning," he said without turning around. "Good morning," Greta replied. "Thank you again for your hospitality. You said that already." He ladled porridge into a bowl and set it on the table, then nodded for her to sit. "Eat. Then we talk." Greta ate the porridge, which was plain but filling, and waited. The man poured himself a cup of something that smelled like bitter herb tea and sat across from her. "I am Owen," he said. "Owen Oakes. I run the sawmill. Greta Zarov. Where were you headed?" "Before you ran out of coin." Greta looked down at her bowl. "I do not know. Somewhere I could find work, I suppose. My husband and I lived in a village 2 weeks north of here. After he died, people stopped giving me work. They said they did not trust an orc on her own." Owen's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "I thought perhaps a larger town would be different," Greta continued, "but I did not make it that far. What kind of work did you do? Laundry mostly, cooking, mending, whatever people needed." Owen took a sip of his tea, his expression thoughtful. "House could use someone to keep it in order," he said finally. "I work the mill from dawn to dusk most days. Girls are old enough to go to school now, but they come home to an empty house and cold porridge. Could use someone to cook, clean, watch them after lessons." Greta stared at him. "You are offering me work, offering you a place to stay and 3 meals a day," he corrected, "in exchange for keeping house and minding the girls, if that suits you." Yes," Greta said quickly before he could change his mind. "Yes, that suits me very well. Good." Owen stood and carried his cup to the wash basin. "I am expected at the mill. Girls will show you where everything is. If you need supplies from the village, there is coin in the jar on the mantel. Use what you need." He pulled on his coat and hat and was gone before Greta could find more words to thank him. The twins woke soon after, stretching and yawning and then sitting bolt upright when they saw Greta still there. "You stayed," Odette exclaimed, scrambling out of bed. "Your father offered me work," Greta said, feeling a smile tug at her mouth for the first time in weeks. "I will be keeping house for you." "Does that mean you will cook supper and help us with lessons?" Marielle asked hopefully. "If you need help, yes." And you will be here when we come home from school. Every day." The girls exchanged one of their silent twin looks, and then they both grinned and threw their arms around Greta in a tangle of small limbs and enthusiasm. The days fell into a rhythm. Owen left at dawn and returned at dusk, often covered in sawdust and smelling of pine. The girls went to school and came home in the afternoon with their slates and primers, chattering about their lessons and their friends. Greta cooked and cleaned and mended, and slowly the house began to feel less like a place where people merely existed and more like a home. She learned that Odette was the bolder of the twins, quick to laugh and quicker to speak her mind. Marielle was quieter, more thoughtful, with a gift for numbers that her teacher praised. Both girls loved stories, and Greta found herself telling them tales her own grandmother had told her, old orc legends about the stars and the mountains and the spirits that lived in the deep forests. Owen remained a man of few words, but Greta began to notice things about him. The way he always checked the girls' homework, even when he was clearly exhausted. The way he carved small wooden toys for them in the evenings, his large hands surprisingly deft. The way he always made sure there was enough food on Greta's plate, even if it meant his own portion was smaller. One evening, 3 weeks after her arrival, Greta was mending one of Marielle's dresses when she noticed Owen watching her from his chair by the fire. She looked up, questioning. "You are good with them," he said quietly. The girls were asleep and the house was peaceful. "The twins, they have been happier these past weeks than I have seen them in a long time." "They are wonderful girls," Greta said. "You have raised them well." Something flickered across his face. "I try. But I am not what they need. They need softness, and I do not know how to give them that." "You are exactly what they need," Greta said firmly. "They know they are safe with you. They know they are loved. That is what matters." Owen was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "You lost your husband." That must have been hard. It was the first time he had asked about her past, and Greta set down her mending. "It was. He was a good man, kind. We had only been married 2 years when the fever came. I am sorry." "And your wife died when the twins were 5, Owen said. "Winter fever." "Same as what took so many that year. She was strong, but not strong enough." His hands curled into fists on his knees. "I should have done more. Gotten her to a healer sooner, maybe." "You cannot blame yourself for a fever," Greta said gently. "I blamed myself for weeks after my husband died. I thought perhaps I had not given him the right herbs, or I should have called for help sooner. But in the end, the fever does what it will." Owen nodded slowly. "Still hard, though." "Yes." They sat in companionable silence after that, the fire crackling between them. Greta returned to her mending, but she was aware of Owen's presence in a way she had not been before. Aware of the breadth of his shoulders and the quiet strength in his face, and the way he looked at his daughters with such fierce, inarticulate love. She was beginning to understand what it meant to feel safe in someone's presence again. And more than that, she was beginning to feel something she had not expected to feel again so soon. She was beginning to hope. The trouble came on a gray morning in late autumn, when the leaves were falling from the trees in great drifts, and the air had the sharp bite of approaching winter. Greta was in the village buying flour and salt when she heard a voice behind her that made her blood turn cold. Well. Greta Zarov. She turned slowly. The man standing behind her was tall and thin, dressed in a long coat and a hat with a brim that shadowed his face. She recognized him immediately. His name was Silas Crane, and he had been one of her late husband's associates in some business venture she had never fully understood. "Mr. Crane," she said carefully. "Been looking for you," Crane said, his smile sharp and unpleasant. "You ran off without settling accounts." "I do not know what you mean." "Your husband owed me money, quite a lot of it as a matter of fact, and since he is not around to pay, that debt falls to you." Greta's heart was pounding. My husband never mentioned any debt. Well, he had it all the same. Borrowed 300 silver to invest in a logging scheme that never paid out. "I want my money, Mrs. Zarov. 300 silver. It might as well have been 3,000. Greta had no money beyond what Owen gave her for household expenses, and she certainly could not ask him to pay off a debt she was not even certain existed. "I cannot pay you," she said. "I have nothing." Crane's smile widened. "Then I suppose we will have to make other arrangements. There are laws about debts, you know, ways of compelling payment." "What kind of arrangements?" "Indentured service, for one. Or perhaps I could take it out of your hide. I hear orcs are good for labor." Several villagers had stopped to watch the exchange, their faces curious or hostile. Greta felt the weight of their stares like a physical thing. "I will not agree to that," she said, keeping her voice steady with effort. "And I do not believe you have any legal claim on me." "We will see what the magistrate says," Crane said. "I will be filing a complaint in the morning." "You had better have your coin ready, Mrs. Zarov, or I will see you hauled off to debtor's prison." He tipped his hat mockingly and strode away, leaving Greta standing frozen in the middle of the market square. She finished her shopping in a daze and walked back to the house, her mind churning. 300 silver. Even if the debt was real, she had no way of paying it. And if Crane could convince a magistrate that she was liable for her husband's debts, she could be taken away from this place, from the girls, from Owen. The thought of leaving made her chest tighten with something close to panic. In just a few short weeks, this house had become more of a home to her than anywhere she had lived since she was a child. The twins had worked their way into her heart with their laughter and their endless questions, and the way they hugged her good night every evening. And Owen, she did not want to examine too closely what she felt for Owen. But she knew that the thought of never seeing him again made her feel hollowed out and lost. When the girls came home from school, she forced herself to smile and ask about their day. When Owen returned from the mill, covered in sawdust as always, she served supper and listened to the twins chatter about their lessons. But her mind was elsewhere, turning over the problem of Silas Crane and his threats. After the girls were asleep, Owen noticed. He always noticed more than he let on. "Something wrong?" he asked, setting down the piece of wood he had been carving. Greta hesitated. She did not want to burden him with her troubles, but she also could not lie to him. "A man came to see me in the village today," she said slowly. "He says my husband owed him money, 300 silver. He says the debt passed to me when my husband died, and he is going to the magistrate to demand payment." Owen's expression darkened. "Who is this man?" "His name is Silas Crane. I do not know much about him, only that he was involved in some business with my husband before the fever." "And you think the debt is real?" "I do not know," Greta admitted. "My husband handled all our finances, but even if it is real, I cannot pay it. I have nothing." Owen was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. Then he stood and reached for his coat. "Where are you going?" Greta asked. "To talk to this Crane." "Owen, no, it is late and he threatened you," Owen said, his voice flat and hard. "That is not something I let stand." Before Greta could argue further, he was out the door and striding into the night. Greta sat by the fire, her hands clenched in her lap, and waited. She had no idea what Owen intended to do, but she knew from the set of his shoulders and the ice in his voice that it would not be pleasant for Silas Crane. Owen returned an hour later, his expression grim but his hands unclenched. He shrugged off his coat and sat down across from Greta. "Talked to Crane," he said. "Told him I wanted to see proof of this debt before he went to any magistrate. And he has a promissory note, signed by your husband, dated 2 years back, says it was for an investment in a timber scheme." Greta closed her eyes, so the debt was real. But, Owen continued, I also did some checking, asked around at the tavern. Turns out Crane is known for this sort of thing. He loans money to desperate men at high rates, then comes after their widows when they die. So what does that mean? Means I am going to fight him, Owen said simply. There are laws about debt on the frontier. A widow is not automatically liable for her husband's obligations unless she inherited property or goods of value. Did you? No, Greta said. We rented our cottage. The landlord sold off everything we owned to cover back rent after my husband died. Then you owe him nothing, Owen said. The debt died with your husband. I will go to the magistrate in the morning and make sure Crane knows it. Greta stared at him. You would do that, stand for me before the magistrate. Why would I not? Because I am an orc. Because I have been here less than a month. Because people will talk. Owen's gaze did not waver. Let them talk. You are under my roof. That makes you my responsibility, and I do not let people threaten what is mine. The words were simple, almost matter-of-fact, but they hit Greta like a physical blow. She had not belonged to anyone or anything in so long, and the idea that Owen considered her part of his household, part of what he protected, made her throat tighten with emotion. Thank you, she whispered. Owen nodded once and stood. Get some sleep. Tomorrow I will deal with Crane. The next morning, Owen dressed in his best clothes, which meant a clean shirt and trousers without patches, and headed into the village. Greta stayed behind with the girls, trying to focus on the housework and failing miserably. She kept imagining Owen standing before the magistrate, arguing on her behalf, and what might happen if he failed. He returned at midday, his expression unreadable. Greta met him at the door, her heart in her throat. Well, she asked. Crane will not trouble you again, Owen said. Showed the magistrate the law. Debt does not transfer to a widow who inherited nothing. Magistrate agreed and dismissed the complaint. Crane was not happy, but there is nothing he can do about it. Greta sagged against the doorframe, relief washing over her in a wave so strong it left her dizzy. It is over. It is over. I do not know how to thank you. Owen looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his gray-blue eyes. You do not have to thank me. Just stay. The words hung in the air between them, weighted with meaning. Greta met his gaze and saw something there that made her breath catch. It was not quite longing, not quite hope, but something raw and honest that she had not seen in him before. I will, she said softly. As long as you will have me. Owen nodded, and for just a moment the corners of his mouth lifted in something that might have been a smile. Winter came hard and fast that year, blanketing the valley in snow and driving everyone indoors. The sawmill slowed as the roads became impassable, and Owen spent more time at home, repairing tools and working on a project he would not let the girls see. Greta found herself learning the rhythms of his presence in a way she had not before. The way he stamped the snow from his boots before coming inside. The way he always hung his coat on the same peg. The way he sat in his rocking chair after supper, whittling by the firelight while the twins played on the floor and Greta mended or spun wool. It was domestic and quiet and utterly, unlike the passionate, whirlwind romance she had shared with her late husband. But it was also warm and steady and real, and Greta found herself falling into it as easily as breathing. She fell in love with Owen Oakes the way snow falls in winter slowly, inevitably, covering everything until the world was transformed. She fell in love watching him teach Marielle how to measure wood for a birdhouse, his big hands guiding her small ones as he showed her how to mark a straight line. She fell in love watching him braid Odette's hair in the mornings before school, his rough fingers surprisingly gentle as he worked the strands into a neat plait. She fell in love watching him sit with the girls at night, reading to them from a battered book of fairy tales until their eyelids drooped, and they curled up against his sides like sleepy kittens. She fell in love with his silences and his rare smiles, and the way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not watching, as if he was trying to figure her out and could not quite manage it. But she did not know if he felt the same way, and she was too afraid to ask. He had given her a home and safety and kindness, and she did not want to jeopardize that by asking for more. The twins, however, were not so reticent. It was a bright afternoon in midwinter, and the girls were helping Greta make bread. Owen was in the workshop behind the house, and the sound of his saw drifted through the cold air. "Greta," Odette said suddenly, her hands buried in a mound of dough. "Do you like Papa?" Greta nearly dropped the wooden spoon she was holding. "What, do you like him?" Marielle repeated, looking up from where she was kneading her own small lump of dough. "The way people like each other when they want to get married." Greta's face felt hot. That is not why would you ask that?" "Because you smile at him," Odette said matter-of-factly. "And he smiles at you, except he does it with his eyes instead of his mouth because he is Papa. And you are always nicer when he is around," Marielle added. "Like you stand up straighter and your voice goes softer." Greta stared at the two of them, these small, perceptive creatures who saw far too much. "I think your Papa and I are friends," she said carefully. "That is all." "But do you want to be more?" Odette pressed. Greta sighed and set down her spoon. There was no point in lying to them. They would see right through it. "Yes," she said quietly. "I care for your father very much, but I do not know if he feels the same way, and I do not want to make things difficult." "You should tell him," Marielle said with the absolute certainty of a 7-year-old. "I do not think it is that simple." "Why not?" "Because I am an orc and he is human," Greta thought. "Because people will talk and judge and make life hard for him and for you. Because I have already lost one husband and I do not know if I can survive losing another." But she said none of that. Instead, she said, "Because sometimes grown-ups need more time to figure things out." The twins exchanged one of their looks, and Greta knew the conversation was far from over. That night, after the girls were asleep, Owen came in from the workshop carrying a wooden chest. It was beautifully made, with dovetailed corners and a hinged lid, and the wood had been polished until it gleamed. "Made this for you," he said, setting it down by the fire. "Thought you might want something to keep your things in." Greta stared at the chest, her throat tight. It was the most beautiful thing anyone had ever made for her. The wood was smooth under her fingers when she reached out to touch it, and she could see the care that had gone into every joint and every surface. "Owen," she whispered, "this is too much." "No, it is not." He stood with his hands shoved in his pockets, looking awkward and uncomfortable in a way she had not seen before. "You have been good to the girls, good to me, wanted to give you something. I do not know what to say, do not have to say anything, but Greta did." She stood and crossed to him, and before she could second-guess herself, she reached up and cupped his face in her hands. His skin was rough with stubble, and he smelled of sawdust and winter air. "Thank you," she said, "for this, for everything." Owen's eyes searched hers, and she saw something shift in his expression. Slowly, carefully, he reached up and covered her hands with his own. "Greta," he said, his voice low and rough. "I am not good with words, you know that, but you should know," he paused as if gathering courage. "You should know that I care for you, more than I thought I would, more than I think is wise, maybe." Greta's heart was pounding so hard she thought it might burst. "Owen, let me finish," he said. "I know people will talk. I know it will not be easy, but I do not care about that. I care about you, and if you feel the same, I would like to see where this goes." Greta felt tears prick at her eyes, but they were good tears, happy tears. "I feel the same," she said. "I have felt the same for weeks now." Owen let out a breath that might have been relief or laughter or both. Then, with a gentleness that belied his size, he leaned down and kissed her. It was a chaste kiss, barely more than a brush of lips, but it felt like a promise. When he pulled back, his eyes were warm in a way Greta had never seen before. "Good," he said simply. And then, because he was Owen and could not help himself, he added, "Now you should get some sleep. Morning comes early." Greta laughed, breathless and giddy, and kissed him again. The winter passed, and spring came slowly to the valley. The snow melted, revealing the dark earth beneath, and the trees began to bud. The sawmill roared back to life, and Owen's days grew long again. But now when he came home, he greeted Greta with a kiss on the forehead or a hand on her shoulder, small gestures that spoke of affection and belonging. The twins were delighted by the change in their father, and they took every opportunity to push Greta and Owen together. They insisted that Greta sit next to Owen at meals. They claimed to need help with their lessons that required both adults to lean over the same slate. They asked endless questions about romance and marriage, until Owen finally told them to mind their own business, though his tone was more amused than stern. Greta had never been happier. The fear and grief that had haunted her for so long were still there, tucked away in the corners of her heart, but they no longer defined her. She had a home, a purpose, people who cared for her. She had Owen, solid and steady and true. But she also knew that happiness, once found, was a fragile thing. And she could not quite shake the feeling that something was coming, some storm on the horizon that would test everything she had built. The storm arrived on a warm afternoon in early spring, in the form of a woman on horseback. Greta was in the garden, planting seeds for the summer vegetables, when she heard the sound of hooves on the road. She looked up to see a woman dismounting in front of the house. The woman was human, perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair pinned up beneath a traveling hat and a dress that spoke of money and status. "Can I help you?" Greta asked, brushing dirt from her hands. The woman turned, and her eyes widened slightly when she saw Greta's green skin. But she recovered quickly and smiled. "I am looking for Owen Oakes," she said. "Is he here?" "He is at the mill. Can I give him a message? I would prefer to speak with him directly." The woman's smile was polite but cool. "I am Helen Farrow. I knew Owen's late wife." Greta felt something twist in her chest, but she kept her expression neutral. "I will fetch him for you. Please, come inside." She showed Helen into the house and then walked quickly to the mill. Owen was in the yard, directing a pair of workers as they loaded cut timber onto a wagon. He looked up when he saw Greta approaching, his expression shifting to concern. "What is wrong?" "There is a woman at the house," Greta said. "She says her name is Helen Farrow. She says she knew your wife." Owen's face went still. "Helen is here. You know her. She was my wife's cousin." Owen wiped his hands on his trousers and started toward the house, Greta hurrying to keep up. "What does she want?" She did not say. Helen was waiting in the main room, her hands folded primly in her lap. She stood when Owen entered, her face lighting up with a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. "Owen," she said warmly, "it has been so long." "Helen." Owen's tone was cautious. "This is a surprise. I was passing through the region and thought I should stop to see how you and the girls were doing." Her gaze slid to Greta, standing in the doorway. "I did not realize you had taken on household help." "Greta keeps house for us," Owen said shortly. "What brings you this way?" Helen's smile faltered slightly. "Can we speak privately?" Owen glanced at Greta, and she saw the apology in his eyes. "I will be in the garden," she said quietly, and slipped back outside. She tried to focus on her planting, but her hands were shaking and her mind was churning. Who was this Helen Farrow, and what did she want? The way Owen had reacted to her name suggested a complicated history. 20 minutes later, Owen came out to the garden, his face like thunder. He crouched down beside Greta and said, "We need to talk." Greta's stomach dropped. "What is it?" "Helen thinks she has a claim on the girls," Owen said, his voice tight with anger. "She says as their closest blood relative, she should be their guardian. She wants to take them back to live with her." Greta felt the world tilt beneath her. "Can she do that?" "I do not know," Owen admitted. "She says she has spoken to a magistrate in her district and he believes she has a case. She is family. I am just their father." "Just their father," Greta echoed, fury rising in her chest. "You have raised them for 2 years on your own. You have fed them and clothed them and loved them. You are everything to them." "I know that," Owen said, "but the law might not see it that way. A man alone with no wife, no mother to help raise daughters, some magistrates think that is not proper." Greta's mind was racing. "What are you going to do? Fight her?" Owen said flatly. "I will not let her take my girls." "What can I do?" Owen looked at her for a long moment, then he said, "Marry me." Greta's breath caught. "What? Marry me?" Owen repeated. "If I have a wife, Helen has no case. The girls will have a mother again, and no magistrate can claim they are being raised improperly." It was the most unromantic proposal Greta could imagine, and her heart sank even as she understood the logic of it. "You want to marry me to keep the girls?" "No," Owen said sharply. "I want to marry you because I care for you, because I want you in my life for good, but I will not lie and say the timing is not convenient." "Helen's showing up now," he shook his head. "I should have asked you weeks ago, but I am asking now. Will you marry me?" Greta looked at him, this gruff, inarticulate man who had taken her in when she had nothing, who had stood for her against Sela's crane, who had made her feel safe and valued and loved. She wanted to marry him more than anything. But she also needed to know that he wanted it too, not just as a means to an end. "You love me?" she asked quietly. Owen's expression softened. "Yes," he said simply. "I love you. Should have said it before now, but I am saying it now. I love you, Greta. And I want you to be my wife, not just because of Helen, but because I cannot imagine my life without you in it anymore." Greta felt tears spill down her cheeks. "Then yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will marry you." Owen pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Thank you," he said into her hair. "Thank you." They went back inside together, hand in hand. Helen was still sitting in the main room, her expression smug. But when she saw them, her smile faltered. "Helen," Owen said, his voice calm and cold, "I would like you to meet my betrothed. Greta and I are to be married within the week, so you can take your concerns about the girls' upbringing back to your magistrate and tell him they are unfounded. My daughters have a mother. They do not need you." Helen's face went white with anger. "You cannot be serious. You are marrying an orc." "Owen, think about what you are doing. Think about the girls. They will be ostracized. People will accept it or they will not," Owen said flatly. "That is their choice. But Greta is going to be my wife and she is going to be the girl's mother. That is not up for debate." Helen stood, her hands clenched at her sides. "You are making a mistake. Then it is my mistake to make. Now I think it is time for you to leave." Helen stared at him for a long moment, and then she turned on her heel and stalked out of the house. They heard her horse gallop away, and then the house was silent. Owen let out a long breath and sat down heavily at the table. Greta sat beside him and took his hand. "You think she will cause trouble?" she asked. "Maybe," Owen said, "but it does not matter. The girls are staying with me." "With us?" "The girls," Greta said suddenly. "We need to tell them." "Tell them what?" a small voice asked. They turned to see the twins standing in the doorway, their school slates forgotten in their hands. They must have come in through the back door and heard everything. "How much did you hear?" Owen asked. "Enough," Odette said, her eyes wide. "You are going to marry Greta." "If that is all right with you two," Owen said. "She would be your mother, not your first mother," but he did not get to finish. Both girls dropped their slates and ran to Greta, throwing their arms around her in a fierce hug. "We want you to be our mama," Marielle said, her voice muffled against Greta's shoulder. "We have wanted that for forever." "Forever," Odette echoed. "Please say yes. Please, please, please." Greta wrapped her arms around them and looked at Owen over their heads. He was smiling, a real smile that crinkled the corners of his eyes, and in that moment, Greta knew that everything was going to be all right. "I already said yes," she told the girls softly. "I am going to be your mama." The twins cheered, and Owen stood and pulled all three of them into his arms. And for a moment, the world was nothing but warmth and laughter, and the knowledge that they were a family now, whole and complete. They were married 4 days later in the village chapel, with the twins as witnesses and a handful of Owen's friends from the mill in attendance. The ceremony was simple and brief, and the priest looked faintly uncomfortable marrying a human man to an orc woman, but he did it nonetheless. Greta wore a dress borrowed from one of the village seamstresses, simple blue wool that brought out the green in her skin. Owen wore his best clothes, and his hands shook slightly when he slipped the ring onto her finger. "I, Owen Oakes, take you, Greta Zarov, to be my wife," he said, his voice steady and sure. "To have and to hold from this day forward." "I, Greta Zarov, take you, Owen Oakes, to be my husband," Greta replied, tears streaming down her face. "To have and to hold from this day forward." When the priest pronounced them married, Owen kissed her gently, and the twins clapped and cheered from their seats in the front pew. Afterward, they walked back to the house together as a family, the twins skipping ahead and Owen's hand warm in Greta's. The village watched them go, some faces friendly, some less so, but Greta found she did not care. She had everything she needed right here. That night, after the girls were asleep and the house was quiet, Owen and Greta lay together in the bed that had been his alone for so long. He held her close, his chin resting on the top of her head, and she listened to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," he said quietly. "I know I do not say it enough, but I do. I love you, Greta." "I love you too," she whispered. "More than I thought I could love anyone again." "I am glad you were at that station," Owen said. "Glad the girls found you, glad you came home with us." Greta tilted her head up to look at him. "So am I." He kissed her then, slow and deep, and Greta felt the last of the walls around her heart crumble away. She was home. She was loved. She was safe. The years that followed were not always easy. There were people in the village who never quite accepted Greta, who whispered behind their hands and made their disapproval known. But there were also people who welcomed her, who came to appreciate her kindness and her hard work, and the way she loved Owen, and the girls so fiercely. Odette and Marielle grew into bright, confident young women, unashamed of their orc mother and quick to defend her against anyone who spoke ill of her. They learned to cook from Greta and to work wood from Owen, and they inherited the best traits of both their parents. Owen's sawmill prospered, and he hired more workers as the years went on. But no matter how busy he was, he always made time for his family. He and Greta built a life together, one day at a time, and it was a good life, full of laughter and hard work and the quiet, steady love that grows between two people who have chosen each other again and again. It was early spring again, 5 years after that rainy night at the coach station, and Greta was in the garden planting seeds for the summer vegetables. The twins were at school and Owen was at the mill, and the world was green and growing and full of promise. She heard footsteps behind her and turned to see Owen walking up the path from the mill. It was early for him to be home, and she felt a flicker of concern. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Everything is fine," Owen said. He sat down on the bench beside the garden, and Greta saw that he was holding something. "I wanted to give you this." He held out a small wooden box, beautifully carved with a pattern of leaves and vines. Greta opened it and found a necklace inside, a simple silver chain with a pendant shaped like a star. "It was my mother's," Owen said. "She gave it to my wife before she died, and now I want you to have it." Greta looked at him, her eyes blurring with tears. "Owen, you are my wife," he said simply. "My partner, the mother of my children. I should have given it to you years ago, but I wanted to wait until I was sure you knew what it meant. It means you are family. You are mine and I am yours, and nothing will change that." Greta set the box aside and wrapped her arms around him, burying her face in his shoulder. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you so much." "I love you too," Owen said, holding her close. "More than I have words for." They sat together in the spring sunshine, surrounded by the garden Greta had planted and the home they had built together. And Greta felt a peace so profound it took her breath away. She had left the station in tears, broken and alone, with nowhere to go and no hope left in her heart. But two little girls had seen her crying and invited her home, and their gruff, loving father had given her a place to belong. Now she had a family, a home, a future. She had love. And that, Greta thought as Owen kissed her forehead and stood to head back to the mill, was more than enough. It was everything. The afternoon light slanted through the trees as Greta finished planting the last of the seeds, and she wiped her hands on her apron, looking up at the house that had become her home. Smoke curled from the chimney, and she could hear the distant sound of Owen's saw from the mill. Soon the twins would be home from school, chattering about their lessons and begging for honey cakes. It was an ordinary day, quiet and unremarkable, and Greta loved it with every fiber of her being. She stood and gathered her tools, carrying them to the shed behind the house. As she walked, she thought about the journey that had brought her here. The loss of her first husband, the long weeks of grief and wandering, the rain-soaked bench at the coach station where she had wept until two small girls had taken pity on her. If someone had told her that day that she would find happiness again, she would not have believed them. But life, she had learned, was full of surprises. Sometimes terrible ones, but sometimes beautiful ones too. The sound of running feet made her turn, and she saw the twins racing up the path from the village, their braids flying behind them. They were 11 now, on the cusp of adolescence, and every day they looked more like young women and less like the little girls who had invited her home all those years ago. "Mama," Odette called, waving a piece of paper. "Mama, look, I got full marks on my arithmetic test." "And I finished my essay early," Marielle added breathlessly. "Teacher said it was the best in the class." "I am so proud of you both," Greta said, pulling them into a hug. They were nearly as tall as she was now, but they still fit perfectly in her arms. "Your father will be pleased." "Is there time for honey cakes before supper?" Odette asked hopefully. "There might be," Greta said with a smile, "but only if you help me peel potatoes." The girls groaned good-naturedly but followed her inside, chattering all the while. Greta set them to work at the table and began preparing the evening meal, listening to their stories about school and friends, and the way Mr. Harrow's cat had climbed the same roof again and still would not come down. Owen came home as the sun was setting, his face tired but content. He kissed Greta hello and ruffled the twins' hair, asking about their day. They showed him Odette's test and Marielle's essay, and he read them both carefully, nodding his approval. "Good work," he said simply, but the pride in his voice was unmistakable. They ate supper together, the four of them crowded around the table, passing bread and butter and talking about everything and nothing. Afterward, the twins settled by the fire with their schoolwork, and Owen helped Greta clean up. "You are quiet tonight," Greta observed as they washed the dishes together. "Something on your mind?" Owen dried a plate slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Helen sent a letter." Greta's hand stilled in the wash basin. They had not heard from Helen Farrow in 5 years, not since the day she had tried to claim the twins. "What did she want?" "To apologize, it seems," Owen said. "She says she was wrong to try to take the girls. She says she can see now that they are happy and well cared for, and she regrets the trouble she caused." "You believe her?" "I do not know," Owen admitted. "But it does not matter. The girls are ours. Nothing she says or does can change that now." Greta nodded slowly. "Did she say anything else?" She asked if she could visit sometime. "Not to see the girls necessarily, but to see how we are doing. I think she is lonely." Greta thought about that for a moment. She had every reason to hate Helen Farrow, but she also knew what it was like to be alone and grieving. And Owen's wife, Helen's cousin, had clearly meant something to her. "What did you tell her?" she asked. "I told her I would think about it," Owen said. "But I wanted to talk to you first. This is your home too, and I will not have someone here who makes you uncomfortable." Greta looked at him, this man who always thought of her first, who had given her so much and asked for so little in return. "If you think she is sincere, then I have no objection to her visiting, but only if the girls are comfortable with it." Owen nodded. "We will ask them tomorrow." They finished the dishes in comfortable silence, and then Owen went to check on the twins' schoolwork while Greta prepared the house for bed. She banked the fire and laid out blankets and made sure the door was latched against the night. When she came back to the main room, Owen and the girls were sitting together by the fire. He had his arms around both of them, and they were leaning against his shoulders, their eyes half closed. The sight made Greta's heart swell with love. "Time for bed," she said softly, and the twins groaned but obeyed, climbing into their beds and pulling the quilts up to their chins. Greta and Owen said good night to them both, and then they retreated to their own small room at the back of the house. It was cramped and simple, with barely enough space for the bed and a chest of drawers, but it was theirs. Owen sat on the edge of the bed and pulled off his boots while Greta brushed out her hair. In the mirror, she could see the first strands of gray appearing at her temples and the fine lines beginning to form around her eyes. She was getting older. They both were. But when Owen came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder, she felt as young and alive as she had the first time he kissed her. "I love you," he said quietly, his breath warm against her ear. "I love you too," she replied, leaning back into his embrace. They stood like that for a long moment, simply holding each other, and Greta thought about how lucky she was. How impossibly, wonderfully lucky. She had lost so much in her life. Her parents, her first husband, her home. But she had also found so much. A family who loved her, a place where she belonged, a future full of hope and possibility. And as Owen led her to bed and pulled her close, his heart beat steady beneath her ear, Greta knew that she would never take any of it for granted. She had learned the hard way that life was fragile and precious, and that every moment of happiness was a gift to be treasured. Tomorrow the twins would be a day older, and spring would creep a little further into summer, and Owen would go back to the mill and she would tend the garden and the house. It would be an ordinary day, like so many others. But it would also be extraordinary, because she would spend it with the people she loved most in the world. And that, Greta thought as she closed her eyes and let sleep take her, was all she had ever really wanted. Years continued to pass, each one building upon the last like the rings of a tree trunk, marking growth and change and the steady passage of time. The twins grew into young women, beautiful and confident, with their father's quiet strength and their mother's fierce compassion. They helped in the sawmill during the summers and studied hard during the school year, and when they turned 16, Owen began teaching them the business in earnest. Odette had a head for numbers and logistics, and she took to managing the accounts and coordinating shipments with ease. Marielle had inherited Owen's skill with wood, and she could measure and cut timber with the precision of someone twice her age. Greta watched them with a pride so fierce it sometimes hurt. These girls who had invited her home when she had nowhere else to go, who had called her mama without hesitation, who had become her daughters in every way that mattered. On the twins' 17th birthday, Owen declared that they would have a proper celebration. Not just a family dinner, but a feast with friends and neighbors, a naming day party to mark their passage into adulthood. Greta spent days preparing, baking bread and pies and roasting a pig that Owen had traded for at the market. She cleaned the house until it sparkled and hung garlands of spring flowers from the rafters. The twins helped, of course, though they complained good-naturedly about having to do work for their own party. On the day of the celebration, people began arriving in the afternoon. Owen's workers from the mill came, along with their families. The village school teacher came, and the seamstress who had lent Greta her wedding dress, and even the tavern keeper who had once refused to serve her. Not everyone in the village had accepted Greta over the years, but enough had that she no longer felt like an outsider. She had earned her place here through hard work and kindness, and most people had come to respect her for it. The feast was a joyous affair, with tables set up in the yard and food piled high on every surface. The twins were the center of attention, accepting congratulations and well wishes with grace and laughter. Owen stood to the side, watching his daughters with undisguised pride, and Greta moved through the crowd, making sure everyone had enough to eat and drink. As the sun began to set and the lamps were lit, Owen called for silence. The crowd quieted, turning to listen. "I want to thank you all for coming," Owen said, his voice carrying across the yard. "Odette and Marielle are 17 today, and I could not be prouder of the women they have become." He paused, his gaze finding the twins in the crowd. But none of this would have been possible without the woman who agreed to be their mother when they needed one most. He turned to Greta, holding out his hand. She took it, her cheeks flushing, and he pulled her to stand beside him. "Greta came into our lives when we were all lost and grieving," Owen continued. "She gave us a home again. She gave us love. And I want her to know in front of all of you how grateful I am, how grateful we all are." The crowd applauded, and Greta felt tears prick at her eyes. But before she could respond, the twins stepped forward. "Mama," Odette said, her voice clear and strong, "we have something we want to ask you." "We have been thinking about this for a while," Marielle added, "and we talked to Papa, and he said it was all right to ask." Greta looked between her daughters and her husband, confused. "Ask me what?" Odette took a deep breath. "We want to know if you will stay. Forever. Not just as our mother, but as part of our lives no matter where we go or what we do. We want you to know that you are our family and nothing will ever change that. We love you," Marielle said simply, "and we want you to stay." Greta's vision blurred with tears. "Of course I will stay," she said, her voice breaking. "Where else would I go? You are my family. You are my home." The twins hugged her, and Owen wrapped his arms around all three of them, and the crowd erupted into applause again. Greta closed her eyes and let herself feel the full weight of the moment. The love and acceptance and belonging that she had never thought she would find again. Later, after the guests had gone home and the twins had finally gone to bed, exhausted and happy, Owen and Greta sat together on the porch. The night was cool and clear, and the stars were bright overhead. "Today was perfect," Greta said softly, leaning her head on Owen's shoulder. "It was," Owen agreed. "The girls were happy. They are growing up so fast." "They are," Owen said. Soon they will be making their own lives, finding their own paths. That is what they are supposed to do, Greta said, though the thought of the twins leaving made her chest ache. But it will be strange, will it not? Just the two of us again. Owen was quiet for a moment, then he said, We will manage, we always do. Greta smiled and tilted her head up to kiss him. Yes, we will. They sat in comfortable silence for a while longer, watching the stars wheel slowly overhead. And Greta thought about the long, winding road that had brought her to this moment. The grief and fear and loneliness that had once defined her life, and the love and joy and belonging that defined it now. She had left the station in tears, broken and lost, with no idea what the future held. But two little girls had seen her crying and invited her home, and their father had let her stay, and together they had built something beautiful, a family, a life, a future. And as Owen stood and pulled her to her feet, leading her inside to the warmth of the house they had made together, Greta knew that she had found what she had been searching for all along. She had found her home. The twins left 2 years later, both of them accepted into a prestigious apprenticeship program in a town 3 days' ride away. Odette would study business and trade, and Marielle would continue learning carpentry and woodworking from a master craftsman. It was an opportunity they could not pass up, and Greta and Owen encouraged them to go, even though saying goodbye was one of the hardest things Greta had ever done. She stood in the yard and watched them ride away, their packs strapped to their horses and their faces bright with excitement and nervousness. They waved until they were out of sight, and then Greta went inside and let herself cry. Owen found her sitting at the table, her face in her hands, and he sat down beside her without a word. He simply took her hand and held it, his presence a steady anchor in the storm of her emotions. They will be all right, he said eventually. We raised them well. I know, Greta said, wiping her eyes, but I will miss them terribly. So will I. They sat together until the tears stopped, and then Owen stood and pulled Greta to her feet. Come on, he said, we have work to do, and he was right. The house still needed tending, the garden still needed planting, the mill still needed running. Life went on, even when your children left home. In the weeks that followed, Greta threw herself into her work. She cleaned and cooked and tended the garden, and she helped Owen with the accounts at the mill. She also began visiting the village more often, offering to help with sick neighbors or new mothers who needed an extra pair of hands. She had spent so many years caring for her own family that she had almost forgotten how much she enjoyed helping others. And slowly, she began to carve out a new role for herself, one that did not revolve entirely around being a mother. The twins wrote often, their letters full of stories about their studies and the people they were meeting and the things they were learning. They missed home, they said, but they were happy. They were thriving. And Greta was proud of them, even as she missed them with an ache that never quite went away. One evening, nearly a year after the twins had left, Owen came home from the mill with a thoughtful expression on his face. He hung up his coat and washed his hands, and then he sat down at the table across from Greta. I have been thinking, he said, about what comes next. What do you mean? The girls are gone, Owen said. The mill is doing well. We have saved a bit of money over the years. I thought maybe it was time to think about what we want to do with the rest of our lives. Greta looked at him, surprised. What do you want to do? Owen was quiet for a moment, his hands folded on the table. I want to spend more time with you, he said finally. I want to travel, maybe. See some of the places we have never been. I want to wake up in the morning and not have to rush to the mill. I want to sit on the porch with you and watch the sun set and not worry about anything else. Greta felt her throat tighten. You want to retire? Not entirely, Owen said. But I am tired, Greta. I have been working since I was a boy, and I think maybe it is time to slow down. Let someone else run the mill. I have trained enough workers over the years. One of them could take over." "What would we do?" Greta asked softly. "Whatever we want," Owen said. "We could stay here, or we could go somewhere else. We could visit the twins. We could find a little cottage somewhere quiet and spend our days doing nothing at all." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I just want to be with you. That is all I have ever wanted." Greta looked at this man who had given her so much, who had loved her so steadfastly and quietly for so many years, and she realized that she wanted the same thing. She wanted time with him, without the demands of work and children and the endless chores of daily life. She wanted to simply be, to enjoy the years they had left together without constantly looking ahead to the next task. "I think that sounds wonderful," she said, squeezing his hand. "Let us do it." Owen smiled, a rare, full smile that lit up his whole face. "Good," he said. "Then it is settled." They made their plans slowly and carefully, taking their time to decide what they wanted and where they wanted to go. Owen trained one of his most trusted workers to take over the mill, and they sold the house to a young family who promised to care for it well. They kept a small cottage on the edge of the village, a place to come back to when they wanted, but they spent the next few years traveling. They visited the twins in their new town and marveled at the women they had become. They traveled to the coast and saw the ocean for the first time, standing hand in hand on the shore as the waves crashed at their feet. They wandered through forests and mountains and little villages where no one knew them, and no one cared that she was an orc and he was human. They were happy. Happier than Greta had ever thought possible. And when they finally returned to their cottage, older and grayer and content, they settled into a quiet routine that felt like coming home. They tended a small garden and read books by the fire and welcomed the twins when they came to visit, which was often now that they had finished their apprenticeships and started their own lives. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the valley, Owen turned to Greta and said, "Do you ever think about that night at the station, when the girls found you?" "Sometimes," Greta said. "I think about how lost I was, how hopeless. I did not think I would ever be happy again. And now," Greta looked at him, this man who had saved her in ways he would never fully understand, "now I am happier than I ever thought I could be. You gave me a home, Owen. You gave me a family. You gave me a life." "You gave me the same," Owen said quietly. "You brought light back into this house when I thought it was gone forever. You loved my daughters as if they were your own. You loved me when I did not know how to ask for it." He took her hand and pressed it to his chest. "I do not know what I did to deserve you, but I am grateful every day that the girls saw you crying on that bench." Greta leaned her head on his shoulder, and they sat together in the fading light, watching as the stars began to appear one by one in the darkening sky. She had lost so much in her life, and she had found so much more. She had grieved and healed and learned to love again. She had built a family from the broken pieces of her heart, and it had been beautiful and messy and perfect in every way that mattered. And as Owen wrapped his arm around her and they sat together in the twilight, Greta knew that she had finally, truly found her place in the world. She had found her home, and she would never leave it again.